Hi, this is Steve from PixelBump. Welcome to our new tutorial on doing global travel maps. Last month, I gave away a free 21K Earth, which is downloadable here in the free stuff section of our website. And this is a really nice Earth for close-ups with a day and night texture. Something that comes up quite a bit these days in motion graphics are these travel globes, where you show a position on one side of the globe and then you follow a path over to another position on another part of the globe. You have these great big sweeping lines and text linked up to the globe. Now, if you're using a standard globe, a large curve like this can be really hard to draw on the surface. If I bring up Cinema 4D and I make a sphere, and we'll make it fairly large. Now, if we want to draw a position from one side of the globe to the other, this can be kind of difficult. So if I grab my spline and I want to have it come out here, then I'll have it land here, you can already see that I have to really kind of position that spline out there. It's already intersecting, and it's not the most graceful curve. And even if I add more points, this is just really kind of an awkward and difficult way to create a spline along a round path. So I'm going to show you a trick I've picked up over the years that makes this job a lot simpler. And we're going to start by creating a plane. And we're going to position it here in -z space. And for the width, I'm going to go 2400 and the height 1200. Just a simple 2-to-1 ratio. That's the important part, because all of the maps of the world that you'll find spread out for a spherical map are a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to go ahead, create a new material, and in that material I'm going to grab the same 21K texture that I included with that free Earth. I'm going to go ahead, turn off its reflectance channel, and drop it on my plane. There we go. And to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to come into my editor and I'm going to bring the texture preview size up to 4K. So that way we have a nice, clean, crisp image to look at. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn on constant shading in my front view, which gives me that nice flat view of the Earth to look at. Now, this is much easier to draw that spline on. I can position a point here in Los Angeles, draw a midpoint, and then bring another point here around where Cairo is. And I can pull that point out, and you can see the arc here is really nice and smooth. It's very pretty to look at, and a much easier one to draw. But how are we going to get this all wrapped around a globe? Well, the first thing we want to do is create a wrap deformer, and we'll create a null to hold everything, and we'll just call this our 3D Earth. Now, if I take all of these things, drop them into my 3D Earth, you can see that immediately we've got something happening, but it's not what we want. So I'm going to click on the wrap. I'm going to change it from cylindrical to spherical. And in the width, I'm going to go with 1200 and 600 for the height. And you can see that Earth is starting to snap right in. And for the radius, I'm going to go ahead and go 1000, just so it's nice and big and easy to animate a camera around. But the important thing to notice here, if I turn off the preview for my wrap, is that spline has also wrapped with it, but it's holding its position from our first point to our second point, and it's a really nice, beautifully smooth curve now. So I'm going to take this, go down to about 1%, so it maintains its nice smooth axis all the way around the Earth. And now I can come back, and if I turn off that position, if I turn off my wrap, I can continue to edit as need be. So maybe I don't want it to go to Cairo, maybe I want to go to London. Well, that's just as easy as moving that point, adjusting the curve if necessary, and then turning the wrap back on. And you'll see that our spline has completely updated its position and still is a nice, beautifully smooth curve. And that's really the secret of the whole animation. But let's go ahead and fill out a little more of this, create ourselves a little animation, and then bring it over to After Effects for compositing. So I'm going to create a rectangle object here, and I'm going to pull my spline out. I'm going to create a sweep, and let's go ahead and adjust this. So maybe it's down to 1 or 2 centimeters in the depth, maybe about 10 probably for the height. And now if I bring that back in and turn it on, we can see much clearer that we have a nice big path that's perfectly smooth going from one place to the other. So let's go ahead, turn this wrap back off, and we'll grab our spline and we'll move it back over here to the Cairo area. And this is where that front view comes in really handy, that we can reposition things easily. So we'll drop that over to Cairo, come back, make sure that we have our first point in a Los Angeles area. And let's go ahead and maybe bring this down to 5. This looks a little too thick for me right now. That's great. So I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'm going to go with -Z on that as well, and maybe a height of, let's say 20 for now, and probably somewhere around 10 is my guess here. And we'll grab our cylinder, and again, this makes positioning so much easier. If you've ever tried to position one of these things on a sphere, you know how hard it can be to get the angle right and get the position exactly correct over some piece of the globe. So if I come in and I'll go ahead and say maybe a radius of 1 for my cap, then we can come over here in the side view, and that's going to be a bit longer than we need, so let's go ahead and bring that down to maybe 5 as well. This doesn't have to position itself directly onto the plane. It can be above it as well, as we're going to see in just a second here when I create some text. And so I'm going to come down to my motext. I'm going to write Los Angeles, which is where I actually am. And let's go ahead and change that font. Maybe something like that, something a little techie looking, a little more exciting. And as I bring that font in, it's going to be far, far too big. But we'll just scale it down until it's something appropriate. We'll say right around there, and we'll see that the text is actually hovering right above that area on the globe. And if we bring our depth down to something more reasonable like 5, that'll become pretty apparent. There it is, hovering above. And if I take my text and my cylinder, drop them underneath my null and turn the wrap back on, I can come around to this side of the globe, and we can see there's Los Angeles, and it's hugging the Earth perfectly. Everything is in a really nice 3D space right on top of that globe. So let's go ahead, turn off the wrap. Let's duplicate those two things. Let's duplicate those two things and move them to the other side. And again, because we're just moving them in the X and Y on a flat plane, repositioning and moving these things is really easy, making this a very fast graphic to set up. So we'll say Cairo, and we'll bring that maybe up here so that white text will pop really nicely. We'll turn our wrap back on, and if we follow our Earth around to the other side of the globe, oops, turn that wrap back off real quick, and let's get those two positioned inside our null. We turn it back on, and there we go. Position is exactly where we're going to want it, and it's easy to reposition anything because we can just always turn the wrap back off, look at it in our flat view, and move that right back around. So let's clean up our naming conventions here just a little bit, and we'll call this end place, end dot, begin place, begin dot, and we'll call this the path, and this the map. And what we can do with our map is duplicate it, call it the cloud layer. Let's delete that off for a second, and let's just position our new map in between the names of the text and our dots. So the path will actually fly underneath this cloud layer. And we'll go ahead, we'll create another new material, and I will just add in the clouds from the 2K Earth, and I'll turn on the alpha. I'll use the clouds as their own alpha, and I'm going to pre-multiply them together. It just gets them a little cleaner looking. Now I can take those clouds, drop them underneath, and again, because we've already positioned them out, they're going to sit there right above our Earth. You can see here in the side view, we've now got two spheres. And if I take this one and move it out, it's going to continue to move out away from the Earth. So the clouds can be anywhere we want. But we don't want them too far away. The clouds don't want to look like they're in a moon orbit or anything. And if I go ahead and take a preview render, you can see there they are, sitting right above the geometry for the Earth itself. So let's go ahead, create a couple new materials here. I'll make one of them red. And let's go ahead and leave the reflectance on for that one. And for this one, we'll go maybe with a nice orange. And we'll drop the orange on our place names, and we'll drop the red on our path. So everything will stand out nicely. There we go. So you can keep adding more paths as needed. Maybe you need to show multiple places, or you can start animating, and that's what we'll do here. We'll create a target camera, and I'm going to create a null for it, and I'm going to call this the camera rotate. And I'm going to move that camera rotate 1,000 units in Z, so it's right here in the center of my globe. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my camera under the rotator. So now what I can do is if I look in the camera view, and my camera set to top, let's switch that over to perspective. I can bring that out, and around, and I can position my target right here. Come zoom in, and now I can set keyframes. Let's give ourselves a few more frames to work with. We'll say a 10-second move. And we'll just grab keyframes for all of these guys in position and rotation. Let's come out to our last frame, move our target, and then we'll take our camera rotate and we'll just swing it around. There we go. And maybe the camera itself now, we can come in, position it a little better. Maybe move our target down, move our target just a little bit. Maybe pull it out so we get a little bit of more overview of the geometry of the area. And we'll go ahead and set that second keyframe. And it follows really nicely, but I'd like to get a little more distance here in the midpoint. So I'm going to grab my camera, pull it out, maybe bring it up a little bit, just to give me a little more of an overview of the distance of this path. There we go. That looks like a fairly smooth move. Let's go ahead and go 1920 by 1080. And let's take, well, you know what? I would like to bring this out just a little bit here for our start position. There we go. And let's take a little preview here at 960. And we'll do a hardware preview. And we'll let that chug for a second. We've got our preview up. Let's go ahead and take a look. And that's looking like a nice smooth camera move, bringing us from one side of the globe to the other. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now we can go ahead and do some nice secondary animation here. Let's go ahead and animate our path. We'll have the end growth start at 0. And obviously at frame 240, we'll go to 100. And there we go. It follows that path right around to Cairo. Very nice. So the other nice thing we can do, because we have everything in 3D space, is add some light to this with shadow. And what I think I'll do is I'll bring my light out, bring it up, and I'm going to go ahead and create another null. And I'm going to call this the light rotate. And I'll drop my light underneath. And same exact procedure, I'll just set a keyframe here at the beginning. And then I'm going to rotate it around along with my camera to illuminate here at the end. Oh, I set positional keyframes. So go back to 0, add that keyframe back in. And now I have a light that's traveling around right behind my camera. And what I can do is come over to my shadows. Let's look at ray traced, or let's look at area shadows here. Do a preview, and you can see now we're getting the interaction of not only the clouds onto the globe, but the path and the text as well. And if you don't like area shadows, you can always come up to something like soft shadows, maybe at a fairly high resolution so they're not too fuzzy, giving you really beautiful shadows right there on the globe. So let's go ahead render this out and bring it over to After Effects and do a little compositing to take this all the way to finish. So here we are in After Effects, and you can see I've got my original render, which has the same animation, same path, and I actually brought the clouds out a little further for this one, just so I could have the path go underneath the clouds as it comes in. And if you look closely, there are shadows from the clouds on the path as well as the earth, which I thought looked really nice. So let's go ahead and build ourselves out a background. So I'm going to create a background, make a ramp, and I'll go ahead, put a gradient on it, and maybe I'll go from black to a deep blue. That looks nice. So I'm going to duplicate my footage layer, and I'm going to create a glow. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it out quite a bit. And see how that intensity looks on this side. That's looking pretty good. We're getting these nice little bits of haze around the earth now, which is good. And let's go ahead and put a fast blur on that. And we'll repeat our edge pixels. There we go. That looks a little nicer. A little smoother for it. And while we're here, let's go ahead and grab a couple images. The first one I'm going to grab is this washed metal. And you can see it's just a really nice metallic texture that I thought looked pretty good. And we'll do a hard light overlay and bring it down to maybe something like 20%. Just enough to give us a little texture in that background. Then over top of everything, I'm going to grab this lens dirt. I'm going to set it to screen, and I'm going to drop that down maybe 20% as well. Nothing super heavy, just enough to give us some texture over this whole image, make it a little more graphic. So now let's start building the focus area in our image. So the first thing I'll do for that is I'm going to add a vignette, and I'm just going to grab my ellipse tool. I'll double click on it, create a sphere around the edges of our layer. I'll set it to subtract. I'll feather it maybe 300 pixels, and I'll drop it down to about 75% of opacity. Nothing too heavy for this one, just enough to help focus. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a keyframe on my mask. I'm going to move it over here a little bit, just darkening this side of the earth a little more, keeping our focus over here. And by the time we get around to Cairo, we'll have switched that over more like that. And it's not a very heavy vignette, but the effect definitely helps focus the eye. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Now let's help also build a little bit of focus by creating an adjustment layer. And for this one, I'm going to put it underneath my lens dirt, just above the globe. I'm going to grab another fast blur, drop it on top, and maybe go out about 12 pixels, maybe 15. There we go. And I'm going to grab a rectangular mask, and I'm just going to pull it across here, create a thin window of interest, set it to subtract, and feather it maybe 200 pixels. And again, we'll set a keyframe here at the beginning, come to the end. That keyframe looks good there. Let's check here in the middle. Maybe bring it up so it follows our path a little better, and just creates a nice little shift tilt look, which I think on this globe ends up looking really nice. Excellent. It's looking really good. So what's the next thing we want to do? How about let's add another adjustment layer. We'll call this the glow, and we'll add a glow over top of the globes as well. And go out a little bit. Let's see, maybe a little bit more. There we go. And we'll throw another ellipse over it, set it to subtract, and we'll just feather this a little bit here, just so we have some nice extra glowing edges, which I think just helps add a little more of that earth-like haze over the top of the whole thing. And let's go ahead and add a black layer right here below our earth, and we can use this just kind of as a fall off, just to help us tune how dark we want that to be. And let's go ahead and bring our top layer of dirt down just a little bit. There we go. Let's take another preview. And I think that's looking really good. I think the only thing that I'm going to add beyond this is going to be a little bit of optical flares. And this is completely optional. Well, most of this has been completely optional as far as taste. But when you're outside the Earth's atmosphere, I think we all expect to see a little bit of sun glow. So I'm going to grab my optical flares. I'm going to drop it on here, and let's look at it as a 3D layer. And we'll go ahead solo it for a second. And let's get its position a little more over. There we go. And let's see, how's that going to animate away? I think this first one, we'll just have it by here be completely out. So we'll end that one there. And let's go ahead and change the look of our flare. And I'm just going to grab a preset. I think the Mighty looks pretty good. And I'll go ahead and increase its brightness. There we go. And maybe from here out to about here, we'll just drop its brightness all the way off. There we go. And let's add a little flicker to it, say about speed of 50 and an amount of about 20. And if that one looks good, which I think it might, there we go. Let's just go ahead and duplicate that layer, and let's go ahead and start bringing this guy in about frame 4. And we'll turn off the keyframes for a moment. What we want to do is bring this one in from the other side. So we'll go ahead, see where it's completely off, maybe about frame 6 here. bring it around, bring its brightness up. And let's go ahead and preview that. And let's go ahead and make sure these are screened. I saw that pop off. There we go. So we haven't lost all of our texture in the background. And it just adds a nice little visual interest over our background. And I think that's looking pretty good. So I think that's where we're going to leave the tutorial today. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've learned something that you can use in your work. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter or Facebook, on Google+, or down in the comments. If you want to keep learning, we have more great tutorials and assets for you to use over at pixelbump.com. Thank you so much for watching. Go and create.